AJ, thank you so much for taking the time to join the Telco AI Deep Dive. I really look forward to getting Capgemini's perspective here, given the breadth and depth of the work you all are doing in the space. Maybe to kind of set the table, you can take us through some of this recently published research that really looks into how business leaders are thinking about implementing generative AI solutions in their various businesses. And, given the nature of our audience, maybe you can highlight some of the learnings that are specific to the telecom industry.
No, absolutely. Yeah. I'm gonna focus on the survey where we're looking at the industry perspective as opposed to the specific end user or consumer perspective. But just as a broader summary across industries, this was a survey conducted across about 1,000 organizations globally across industries, which includes telecom, auto, high tech, retail, financial service, utilities, and a few others. So the survey was focusing on, generative AI, how the boardrooms are thinking about it, how what they're considering in terms of its value, its risks, but also the specific use cases and where they see potential improvements. I think some of the key insights looking at the broader industry perspective is virtually every organization is aware of and has prioritized discussions around generative AI in these boardrooms. I think this is really cool, to be honest. I mean, I think this is a little bit unprecedented in the AI industry as a whole because, despite all of these advancements in AI over the last 15, 20 years and some really cool things that are being even just used in the background on a daily basis, just the sheer mind share of generative AI and potentially what it can do, just globally is very, very interesting. And most of these organizations, have plans to leverage Gen AI in some capacity across their operations. That could be areas like marketing and customer analytics. That could be, like things like call center operations, as well as even, kind of back-end operations and user experience. So definitely seeing, a lot of interest in what Gen AI can do across the business. Speaking specifically on the telco side, we see and that's mobile operators, network operators, cable providers, et cetera. A large majority of the executives still see the benefits, still see that, or they view the benefits of Gen AI outweighing the risks of Gen AI. So there's generally a very bullish sentiment on what Gen AI can accomplish for the business. And looking at diving into a little bit of the use cases that are initially interested in, there's certainly a tremendous amount of initial interest in things like call center analytics and customer interactions. And that's translated to, I think the survey mentioned something like 36% of respondents reported an initial investment in generative AI for call centers. That's kind of like that's like a common starting point for a lot of them. But like I mentioned, a lot of these companies are also considering longer term projects, things like network optimization, operations, potentially media and user interactions with customers across the different types of media. So I think to summarize, the report generally shows that it's virtually every company on the planet, including telcos, are aware of generative AI and they're interested in leveraging its capabilities. There's generally a positive sentiment around generative AI being beneficial for the business. And on the telco side, certainly a big initial look at potentially call centers.
Okay, yeah, we'll maybe get a little deeper into specific use cases, but I guess when I was kind of looking across the companies we cover, Are you using Gen AI with the goal of saving money or making money? And, to the call center point, it seems like a lot of the early traction is around saving money with the long-term strategy that you referenced that really gets into, how do you package this network and sell it? And that kind of, I think, speaks to the monetization a little bit more. But just in brief, if you look across your engagements, your potential engagements, do you see a common pain point? Even if we just take call centers, are they trying to enrich the experience for the customer? Are they trying to more effectively deflect calls? What's kind of the problem if you look across that stands out to you?
Yeah, so I can't comment on a specific customer that we work with, but I can tell you based on both the research report as well as some of our as well as many of our customer interactions. You're absolutely right. Like the call center area is an area of particular interest. So typically when they talk about here's the challenges we're trying to solve for, some of the challenges they look at are, potentially just improving that user experience. So that can come in this form of sort of more intelligent chatbots that can better mimic human conversation. But also on the CSR side, you're looking at things like, summarizing and analyzing, like things like prior interactions with customers, to provide like a better holistic view of what they want, their sentiments, more efficient transcriptions and translations, which is a very clear kind of cost saving exercise, as well as things like classification and routing of these calls, and once again taking a more holistic view as opposed to using basic simple heuristics or rules-based models to like kind of route calls. These are all for the most part either intended to improve customer experience and potentially retention, or reduce time to resolution for issues, and more accurate resolution of issues.
Okay, so this is a great starting point, and I think there's a lot of information detailed in kind of NPS type reporting around how people interact with service providers, how they would prefer to better interact with service providers, an obvious opportunity for Gen AI. But how do you do this if you're an operator going from a standing start with a goal of bringing Gen AI to bear wherever you can in your customer service organization, even down to model development? What are kind of the broad strokes of that process?
So the way we see a lot of customers tackling it, and generative AI, we have to keep in mind it's as a even though the technology for generative AI has been evolving over probably 3 decades, sort of the most recent slew of Gen AI capabilities, which a lot of customers are really looking at as sort of the starting point. It's a relatively it's a new capability that most of them haven't used. So when you talk about a starting point, I think the starting point is always defining those business problems that we talked about and saying, what is generative AI the best tool to apply to this business problem? And then if so, can we, do we have the appropriate data? This is all, none of this is new to the AI industry as a whole. The approach should always be, assessing use cases, assessing the value of use cases, what the measure, key measurement indicators you would see there are, things like do we have the data for this? Do we have do we have the capex or compute power for this? Like, are we too siloed? All those things are just very typical, like, AI assessments that also translate to generative AI. So when you ask about like, okay, well, how do companies start, during this path? It's like any new tool or technology. You got to start with identifying and prioritizing, use cases, and then building, typically building one at a time, and then through that you can build you can assess what happens with the model, monitor it, and then build a governance structure around a broader program. It's not, the problem with this statement, I think you sort of mentioned, it's like, yeah, just applying generative AI across the board everywhere all at once. You get to that anecdote, you get to that thing about, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And that is, you keeping in mind generative AI as a tool, you have to consider it like, what is it best suited for in these use cases in my organization? So that's where I'd say the starting point is.
Excellent. So then, to these use cases that would fall in under the broad umbrella of a network optimization, that can mean a lot of different things. That can have to do with the actual, pre-deployment design of a network, where you look at inventory and you look at desired KPI per geography, and then you determine what you want to actually build in the real world. And I guess maybe I've been thinking more along the lines of service management and orchestration, maybe recency bias, but I'm working on a report on network slicing and kind of beyond the
Yeah.
technology, the business model, and how do you take that to market, et cetera. But just given how dynamic mature telco networks are today, and how rapidly they're changing, it seems like we're going to be at 6G here pretty quick. But I don't know if I want to get into that conversation. But just how do you develop a generative AI strategy that acknowledges that what you're doing is changing very rapidly, but still gives you some upside?
Looking at looking at the kind of that evolution umbrella. We're talking about the evolution of the mobile network, moving from things like non-standalone to standalone 5G. I think broadly the strategy has to revolve around um, you know uh, things like how, based on where my network is today and potentially where my network is going to be tomorrow, looking at things like cost minimization and or optimization of the deployment and execution of Gen AI models. Some of these things that we think about, especially when you're talking about a heavily networked framework of data and models and insights that you want to do. Where are these models executed? Are they on the edge? Are they in the cloud? Are they hybrid? And, are these insights do these insights need to be real time? Can they be near real time? Looking at things like using pre-trained large language models versus more tailored, fine-tuned, smaller models. These all talk about essentially, the framework around how do you look at cost minimization or, usage optimization, right? Because when and then when you and then the other area besides cost is looking at operational risks of using Gen AI across these different, across the network, but across these different use cases, looking at hallucinations, errors. You mentioned some of the benefits of like some of the standalone 5G capabilities, like potentially addressing latency issues. I might have latency issues now. Will the evolution to standalone improve my latency across these use cases? Looking at data access, cybersecurity concerns. So those are broadly like the two areas where I say, it is a tricky, it is difficult to gauge exactly how the evolution has to go, but if they focus on these factors, especially like the optimization, actually looking at how these models are being run as opposed to just what the insights are that are being generated, I think that's really critical to optimize it for any network in the future. Specifically, and also in reference to kind of you're talking about the evolution of 5G networks. I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. One of the things that I think are really interesting when you talk about the capabilities of the evolution, things like network slicing, being able to, on the same network, optimize for things like reduced latency or better reliability or higher speeds or some combination therein. That's I think those are very important influencers and where and how Gen AI is used. But also, yeah, but also looking at the, reduced latencies, like, so you can do things like you might be able to do things in the future where you can do more complex compute. You can leverage those hybrid compute environments where you can get much deeper insights with reduced latencies. So those are the areas I see that'll impact, kind of planning in the future. But I hope that answered your question. I know it was a little bit long-winded.
I wonder how you assign a KPI that acknowledges your introduction of Gen AI into the process. To my earlier comment, if your goal is to save money or make money, can you just bring forward your existing KPIs that speak to those two things and see what happens, or do you need to kind of adjust them to understand whether you're getting the return that you need on your investment into generative AI?
Yeah, I mean, the on the customer side, so starting on the customer side, looking at things like customer satisfaction scores, looking at retention, churn, and also looking at, lift based on potentially upselling or cross-selling and capabilities. These are all historically valuable and still currently valuable capabilities. Yeah, at the end of the day, you're looking to improve your customer interaction, and that generally leads to retention and hopefully, additional revenue in the future. But the other piece of that is also looking at things like reduced time to resolution for call centers. So those are the types of KPIs a lot of customers are looking at, a lot of telco companies are looking at, where they're saying, can we use generative AI? So if a ticket takes 10 minutes to resolve, normally, can I use generative AI to resolve, bring that down to 7 minutes or 6 minutes or five? And then what is the accuracy of that resolution? If you take that across, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of interactions a month or a year, then that's a huge cost savings on their side. So that's a KPI that we've seen customer interest in. On the operations side, the KPIs are they're going to be a little bit different than some of the traditional ones, but still sort of related. Some of the areas we see Gen AI being really applicable, things like speed to insights, looking at finance and other business operations. It helps democratize insights, allows end users to be more efficient in their process, where, for example, if someone might have had to route a request to, another analyst or another group and wait to get a response back, they might be able to generate these responses very quickly. There's a time component there, so there's potentially measurable KPIs in terms of time and cost savings on a user level. Other areas are things like synthetic data generation, right? We like to think Gen AI, like a lot of people are talking about these large language models from like a chat perspective, but when you're looking at things like synthetic data, that's a huge potential benefit for things like faster design of new products, better optimization for backend operations. And that's also something that you can potentially measure, which is, kind of speed to market. And then finally, you're looking at things like, coding and unit testing assistants that have really exploded in the market. And that's, once again, that's speed, time to deployment and development and deployment. So the reduced costs. So these are the types of KPIs that we look at when, or our customers are also looking at when we talk about, what are the benefits of generative AI in this space.
So, based on what you know today, what you think is going to happen in the kind of near to midterm, what do you see as a best case outcome for an operator or other service provider that really gets their strategy right, gets the execution right? And then, other side of that coin, what are some of the risks that they need to be aware of as they go down this path?
So the strategy so first of all, I want to be clear. I mean, I think it's too soon to speculate on tangible like business outcomes for clients. This has exploded on the market this year. They're like a ton of clients are experimenting. There's some of them have had some early measurements and results, but there's really, you can't speculate on like a broader industry view on this has definitely resulted in, whatever percentage improvement for the company. But so taking that in mind, when we talk about, when we talk about like what's the best strategy or approach to looking at Gen AI is, you know, we've seen a lot of companies ask for how are we going to do Gen AI governance? And really it comes down to how do we do AI governance? Like how do we create these steering committees to make sure that these things aren't being developed in silos? They're the best spend of resources, the best spend of effort. We're not spinning our wheels or we're not developing wrong use cases. So that, any company I think that invests in that type of at least initial like governance and building that governance is always going to be, I think there's huge benefits to that. In terms of the best outcomes 2 to 3 years down the line, I think once again, broadly, the outcomes are having like a great governance framework. And if the some of the survey respondents, where we saw like a lot of the operators are expecting things like 8 or 9% sales uplift, reduction in 8 or 9% reduction in costs. I think that was broadly reflective in the report. We can talk about that, and but until they've actually implemented it, no one will. There could be significantly higher, it could be the same, or it could be lower. In terms of the risks, I think there's always the moving too fast risk, and then moving too fast, and then essentially just trying to throw generative AI at everything possible just to see what sticks. There's going to be huge cost considerations. Generative AI models, especially these large language models, can be potentially costly to operate. Looking at how to architect that whole environment, not just saying, okay, I can build this model, but how do I actually effectively deploy it and scale it? And then also not taking into consideration things like accuracy and bias issues, which would negatively impact certainly, customer interactions that could negatively impact that. But that could also impact your business operations. I think if assigning too much trust to any tool like a generative AI tool without appropriate oversight by like a subject matter expert in an area, there's a lot of examples that have been posted on even social media and other sites where it can look right, the output can look right to a layman, but then when you actually dig in, you realize the output isn't accurate. So there's that too much trust issue that you need to address through like a governance model. So that's what when we, speaking very broadly on like the midterm outcomes of using generative AI, I think it's really that it makes companies more aware of the need for these governance structures. Whether it's generative AI or it's any of the other traditional AI, machine learning, analytics techniques that we've used for a long time to great effect, it's being able to realize that that's needed, as opposed to just saying, hey, we're going to run a POC here, a POC here, a POC here, and then we'll figure out what happens.
All right, AJ. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk through with me and with our audience trajectory of Gen AI for operators and then kind of how you navigate that path. It sounds like, to play that back to you, I mean, governance be a great place to start and really build a strong foundation for whatever you're going to do in the future. But it sounds like it's going to be exciting few years.
Yeah, absolutely. I always generative AI, when we look at it from a practitioner's perspective, we look at it a little bit more clinically as like a tool in the toolbox of AI as a whole. I think what's really, at least what's exciting for us is, at the very least, if nothing else, it really helps bring, kind of a little bit more visibility to that industry, or visibility to overall capabilities, in a way that, historically, a lot of companies say they invest in AI, or a lot of companies like kind of do some back end, work in the back end without really, doing it. But just getting that widespread visibility into what AI can accomplish, I think it's super exciting. But to your point, having that governance set up and approaching it in an intelligent way is incredibly important, because there's just so many risks in the space if you just kind of, try to approach it in a slapdash way.
All right, excellent. Well, thank you again for the time, AJ. I really appreciate it.
All right, thanks you so much, Sean.